5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Sofa Club is live.
Hi, and welcome back. Thanks for watching the wonderful Minyan. I am pleased to say we have Eric Steele, the director and the co-writer, here with us. Our lead actor, Samuel Levine, is on his way. So he'll be joining us soon. Remember, this is live, so like anything can happen. We also have our guest, Marc Thompson, who is the co-founder of Black and Gay back in the day and Team Prepster. So welcome, everybody. I just want to kick everything off by asking a few questions. Please note you all can send questions in all through this this evening, and your questions will be answered. So if you have any questions right now about the film, do send them in, and I'll relay them to Eric and Sam, and the questions from the discussion to Marc. So my first question to you, Eric. I know that this film was from a short story. And I wondered why you decided to make it into a feature-length film rather than a short, because it seemed to be the logical thing, and features take a lot of time, as you know.
Well, I would say first that I think my process in general tends to be a little bit of a kind of magical thinking process. I'm not quite sure how I sort of tune into things. It's like almost like a magnetic field, and I really did discover the book of short stories by chance. I was in a bookstore. I was making my first documentary at the time, and it was my first day off in many months. And I went to a bookstore, and the bookseller handed me this book of short stories because I said I didn't think I would have long stretches of time to read, to read a novel or anything longer. And so I was like, oh, great, short stories. And I started reading them, and I read the short story for Minyan, and I had that sort of sensation. It's like when you know you're in the right place and you're sort of like, there's something here, I just don't know quite yet what it is. I mean, it's a little bit like walking into a bar and knowing that's the night that you're going to fall in love. I mean, that's the only way I know how to describe it. I was really certain about something. I just didn't know what I was certain about. And so I read the short story, and I remember calling my agent the next day, and I said, oh, well, like when I finished making this, big feature-length documentary that's taken up, a year of my life so far, I think I'm going to go, I want to go make a short about this short story. And he laughed at me, and he was like, well, that's crazy. Nobody makes shorts. Nobody watches shorts, which I knew was absurd, but it was really one of those agenty kind of comments, and he's no longer my agent. But I was sort of caught. I mean, I don't think I could let go of the story. And I wrote David Desmogus, the writer of the short story, right away. And I said, I really want to adapt this. And he wrote back through his agents, which he has subsequently fired as well. But he wrote back, no. And I kept asking because I couldn't shake this story, and I kept asking, and I kept getting no back as a response, probably for a good 8 or 9 years. And on the 10th time, I think I was like, please, I still want to adapt the short story. And he wrote back, okay, let's talk. And he said, I will let you adapt it under one condition, that you make the story your own, and that when I watch it, I'm watching something that's not me. And so you know, I was a documentarian. I had made documentary films. I thought, well, the answer is I'm just going to go to Toronto, where the short story was set, and I will live with these old Jews and you know, walk around with them and go to shul with them and eat at the little places, and you know, that they buy their food, and get herring and bagels and do whatever they're gonna do, which I did happily, and I, you know, like, learned some Yiddish, and I spent a lot of time doing research and was in the parks and everything with them through this winter. And I came back and wrote a script, and I hated it. It was terrible. And I realized that the reason it was terrible was that I had failed to do the thing that David Bismogus had asked. I hadn't really turned it into my story at all. I had just sort of re-stepped his paces. And I guess it just was like I stared at the back of this book, and I was like, 1986, 87, where was I? I was a young gay man coming out in New York, and you know, how my sense of like trying to find community and belonging was connected to this. And in the short story, the narrator, the main character, is not gay. And so I basically made him into a kind of a sort of DNA avatar of I think of me, and tried to put as much of my own personal experience into the story in the same way I think David Bismogus had put his DNA in the short story. And they began to have that kind of, you know, like the two coils, you know, they began to sort of wind around each other. And there's a lot of, you know, twinning, as I call it, in the movie. And that, in some ways, I think what turned it from a short story into a feature.
And you say, you know, well, we know you're a documentary filmmaker, and I think there are some ways in which you use the camera in the film that feels very documentary-like. And I don't know if that was deliberate, or, you know, in that you wanted to bring that eye in, or you just thought to be immersive, or was it like, oh my God, let's just catch these people in the street, sort of thing?
I think I have a very close relationship with the cinematographer,
right? Okay,
Berkeland, who I adore, and he and I had done a movie together, a very small documentary in Scotland, and I think it really began as this kind of visual sense just between he and I. It didn't feel like we were making a big movie. It felt like we were making a very intimate movie. And I wanted, or we both wanted, the camera to open a window onto a world, and to let that window, let the viewer, the audience, make discoveries through the window, in the same way that the characters were making discoveries. And
hi,
so
Sam. We're joined here by Sam Levine. We're just talking about the camera style,
Great.
Sam. So don't worry, we're going to come to you in a minute. But so
cool.
Have some water, chill. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And I think it was just about letting the camera stay long enough in the moment that the moments became, you know, memories, as they, you know, almost like reading a book. You know, like you had a lot of information to gather in the shot, and hopefully we stayed there long enough for you to gather them. But maybe not, and maybe if you watch the movie again, you will see things and notice things that you didn't the first time or the second time even. And I think that was just sort of how we
Yeah, that's great, because I did notice things the second time around when I saw it, and then again I noticed different things. I think you put little details in. I want to ask you about that. But as Sam is here, I want to talk about the casting, because I thought, Sam, your performance was very measured, very sensitive, very authentic, and I want to know the casting process, like what happened. So Eric, we'll have a bit from you, and then Sam, your side of the story as well, just to hear.
Well,
Did you hit it off immediately, or what, or was it like, yeah, no, I'm not so sure.
I worked with a fantastic casting director, Susan Shopmaker, who I adore, and I think because it was my first feature, she wanted to give me the opportunity to experience, like what that really was to cast, to make these choices and to decide, oh, this, it's like Goldilocks. This is the right one. This is too big, too small. And I really did meet with a lot of incredible young actors. And I think it's, maybe on the heels of Call Me by Your Name, it was sort of a good moment to have this kind of a role out there. There was a lot to it. I think there was it's not easy. The main characters in every single scene, and a lot of actors that probably, I won't mention them, but people really, like they sent in their tapes and they wanted to come in, and I met with a lot, and I really liked them, and I had more people come in. It was like, great, London sounds like fun. And so off we went, and as just as we were getting ready to leave, one of the actors that I called back, his agent was like, you better make up your mind really fast or he's going to take something else. And I was like, oh, weesh. And but we, I met with some other actors. We went to the first part of The Inheritance, part 1. It was this 7-hour day that we had planned, and Susan was completely late. Like, she almost didn't make it to the theater, and I'm, like, where is she? And I'm sitting down, and the play begins with Sam. You have the first lines in The Inheritance. You have the first lines, and I think maybe we got through the first scene, but then there was the scene where you return the books in The Inheritance, and I turned to Susan and I was like, Susan, and she said, I know. I knew this was going to happen. And in a way, well, not in a way, I completely know that in her mind, Sam was the right man for the job from the minute she read the script, and she would say that as well. And I think, she's been a big fan of Sam's work and of Sam for a long time. But I think she was like, you need to make this journey and you need to get there all on your own. And as soon as that happened, there was no one else, right? And well, Sam can take it from.
It's like falling in love, really, isn't it? Because it's that whole process of.
It is, in a way.
Yeah, it is.
Or seeing some. It's a little bit. It's tricky ethical, moral territory. It is partly love and attraction and belief. I mean, there's so much about belief in it, of like this just conviction that someone could pull off this idea, that I had. And that's love. I mean, that definitely is love. That's a form of love, I think.
And trust as well. So on your side, Sam, like, how was it for you? Because the role is incredibly challenging. Even though there are lots of quiet bits, you do have to play somebody who's in turmoil, a lot is going on inside.
Yeah.
And I think you convey that through your body and your eyes very well. But what was that process like for you? Because it was a quite difficult character to play, I think, for an actor, and you rose to the challenge.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I remember first working on it or first reading it, and I knew like it was or I felt the inclination that it was going to be a lot about like withholding, a lot about keeping the tension, a lot about not showing your cards too soon, because David doesn't show his cards. He's not even aware of his cards, and yet the cards are there, and that needs to be seen by the audience and by everyone around them. So how can you do that? So it was a lot about withholding and waiting until he really can smile, until he feels comfortable in his body, until he feels comfortable speaking his truths, and that was really cool to do. And maybe it's just something I connect with too in life.
Yeah, but and also, I mean, let's get down and dirty.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. Yeah.
Do it.
I thought the sex scenes were wicked. No, they were really good. And when I met Eric, I was like, oh, let me find out a little bit more about this guy, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you did both of you actually did you had beautiful chemistry between you. And as you know, there's all these controversies about actors and roles and everything, but you threw yourself in it. So, like, how was that for you, queering that role? Because I think your body language, even when you went into there was a part you went into the bar and you did something with your hand on your hair, and I just thought that was so exquisite. Just little moments like that I noticed in your body language that were really, I thought, embodied a young gay man. But the sex, how was that for you?
It was scary, liberating, exciting, which is, I think, what sex should be, the meeting of two bodies, of being physical with someone, of being liberated, of being free. But also it's extremely vulnerable to be touched like that. And whether, and the craving for, especially and specifically, male intimacy that David has, and just kind of let that take over, because I think that definitely lives within me in a capacity. I feel like it lives within all of us, the craving for intimacy, whether it's with the same sex, a different sex, whoever. So I felt really lucky to give that a go. I still am like figuring out why most of my short career, if I can call it that, there's a lot of sex and a lot of like being embodied, which I'm still trying to figure out what that means, but I'm just going with it.
Yeah, I think go with it, and I understand how also vulnerable making it is to expose yourself. Both you, Eric, in making this film around bringing yourself into the film as the author David Besmogi asked you to do, and then Sam, you embodying yourself within the film as well. Not just the sex, but the trauma, the alcoholic, the self-medication, the dysfunction and the trauma from the character having experienced violence at the father and early in school. So I thought all those things were very touching and affecting in the film. I wondered how you found it working with Ron Rifkin, because, incredibly experienced older actor. What was that like for you? How did you feel like, working opposite him? Because you had a lot of scenes with him.
It felt great. One of my favorite things was the kind of the meta-ness that it took on of me, Sam, learning from this older, wiser actor who's kind of been through it, and then David learning from his grandfather and seeking comfort, and that totally happened. And it was just filled with love and gratitude, and I learned so much from being with Ron and working with Ron, and learned about acting, learned about the Jewish faith, learned about love. He shared a lot about his relationship with his wife, Iva, that was really inspiring to me. So it was a really, really beautiful working relationship.
And speaking about that kind of intergenerational discussion, I want to go to Marc, because Marc runs this Instagram account, is co-founder of Black and Gay Back in the Day. And what the film does very well is it has all these intergenerational conversations: father, son, grandfather, grandson, mother, son, all of these, which within communities we don't see. And then you have the older gay couple who speak through codes to David. So, Marc, why did you feel the necessity to start this, and how do you feel intergenerational conversations are happening in the UK amongst immigrant gay men, particularly, actually, as this film is set within a gay male paradigm?
Sure. Well, before I just jump into that, I can see, Eric, why you cast Sam, having spent 21 hours in your company, Sam, at the Inheritance 3 times. So I can see why you're there. So
there you go. This is a magic made to happen. It's all synergy.
Brilliant. Black and Gay Back in the Day is an little background. It's an Instagram account which I started almost a year ago this month with a young Black gay man called Jason Okandaya. And what we wanted to do was to curate a page on Instagram which celebrated Black queer life in the UK from 1970 to 2000. And we asked for submissions from a wide range of queer people who had partied, who'd fallen in love, who'd run clubs, who were activists. And what we wanted to do was to demonstrate, particularly in a UK context, and it was around LGBT History Month, which is in February in this country, that Black queer folk have always existed. And very often when we look at our queer history from the UK, we look to the US, and we wanted to redress that balance. So that's what the page does. And in answer to your question, one of the major outcomes of that has been a younger generation connecting with their history, connecting with a past that, with all the social media, I'm always flustered sometimes with all the social media and the access that we have, that people don't tend to look back. And I can understand why, because we live now, and why would you want to look back to a time which was really traumatic for much of our community? But what Black and Gay Back in the Day has done is to connect younger people with that past, so they feel a sense of strength, they feel a sense of community, which then enables them to walk a little bit taller in the world today. What's really important, and intergenerational conversations and work is central to what I do in my career and in my activism. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I didn't have it as a young Black gay man. We are a relatively new population in this country of Black queer folk, 50 years, in terms of massive numbers. So I didn't have that growing up. The oldest people who were older than me were like 25 when I came out, and that felt like ancient. And so I want to ensure that younger queer folk, particularly younger queer Black men, are able to talk to people like me so they can learn, and we can make life a little bit easier for them. But on the flip side, an intergenerational conversation isn't just one way. And I think, as Sam has pointed out with talking to the actor, I'm sure as much as you got from him, he got from you. And I think that this is why the intergenerational conversations are really, really important, because we know that our community can be quite ageist. You hit 35, you're put on the shelf, and that's it. You're meant to get married, get a dog, and you're forgotten about.
You have a dog, Marc.
I have a dog. I'm still not married. But my point, though, is that what happens is we disappear. And intergenerational conversations reconnect our community, and there's a real strength in that. And we can pass on the stories and the lessons that we've learned. But also, I now feel more motivated. I feel more empowered. I feel a renewed sense of energy now that I work with a 24-year-old who's telling me that's how you should do Instagram. Right? That's how you do a story. So for me, it's a really, really rich thing that we can do. And I think the AIDS crisis took a lot of that away from us. And that's why I want to redo that. And that's why I think it's incredibly important for us.
Thanks for that, Marc. And it's, back to you, Eric, because, you mentioned AIDS, the AIDS crisis, just momentarily in the film, but very powerful. with the names on the wall, and you speak eloquently about the impact that has had on you. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, I mean, I think this notion. I mean, the notion of the lists. Like the lists of people taking down names. I do think had. We talked briefly earlier about the echoes between the Holocaust and AIDS, and I think it would also be true of the slave trades in America. There were books that there was some strange need to write every name and every body down. Like everyone had to be accounted for because they were being transferred, right? They were being moved. And I do think that that incident really happened to me. I did wake up in a man's apartment, and I remember it was similar to that moment in the movie where it was like, oh, the sun is coming out, and here is a man cooking breakfast for me and making me scrambled eggs and bacon. They were the best eggs I'd ever had, and I was like, who are those names? And I want to be on that list. It was, like this is back in the day of Studio 54 or shortly thereafter, where you wanted your name on that list so that you could get in. You were like, I want to be on the list. I want to come back. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really the one of the sort of most terrifying moments of my life was realizing that the list wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. And I mean, it was a little bit earlier than 1985, but it had already started. And I think that the sense of trauma and the sense of loss and the presence of it as it was happening, that it wasn't something that happened somewhere else. It was happening in the rooms that you were in. This sense that people that you saw on Friday might be gone on Sunday. I mean, I think I remember. I'm not going to remember who the author was, but someone once said it was like going to a dinner party and you would be sitting there eating with people, and in the middle of a course someone would get up from dinner and then they just never returned. And I think the trauma, the survivorship of such like epic, unmeasurable, more than list, more than names kind of loss, where whole populations were just wiped out. I mean, I do think that is, it is the intersectional bond between Jews and queers, and between, the African diaspora survivors, and it must be happening in Myanmar, and it's happening. This is our world, like this is the world we live in, and to pretend that it isn't the world we live in is like the lie. It's like, oh no, it's not so bad. Yeah, it really was indescribably bad. That's how it's beyond indescribably bad.
Yeah. And thanks for laying that out, because I think now, back to you, Marc, we've got PrEP. The risk is no longer the same, and I wonder if that influences people's distance from that past, which was devastating. A whole generation of men, trans and cis, died, and it literally meant death. And I just think now we're in a different time. If you felt there's a shift in consciousness around that,
I mean, yes. I mean, there definitely has. I mean, it's in some ways we have become victims of our own success, right?
Okay.
So it's partly to do with PrEP, but it's also to do with the success of HIV treatment. The fact that people who are diagnosed with HIV, if they're diagnosed, you will live a normal, healthy, can't always guarantee a happy life, but a healthy life, right? As long as you take your medication. If you take your medication, you won't pass HIV on. So there is now more invisibility about HIV, and that's for a number of reasons, right? One, most people get their medication and they get on with their lives. Two, HIV is still incredibly stigmatized, so lots of people don't come out or feel that they don't need to. Or three, they're just getting on with their life. And I have this conversation very often with people, and this is why films like Eric's, plays like The Inheritance, TV shows like It's a Sin, even quick boost, my own podcast, We Will Always Hear. These are so important because in the last year of the 40th anniversary of the epidemic, it has put the conversation and the history back on the table.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be really quick about this. I don't blame this younger generation who are 20, 25 years younger than me and Eric, not looking back at the past. Why would you want to? Why would you want to spend all of that time remembering death and disease and shame, the things that your school bullies told you about, the thing that your parents were scared about? Why would you want to go back there? And why would you want that to be the mainstay of our life? I love this fact that this generation are sex positive. They can take PrEP. They don't have to worry about HIV in the way that we once did. But if we think about that intergenerational conversation we had just now, in the same way that we have to remember our history if we are Jewish, our history if we are from the African diaspora, it's really important that we recognize that history, because that history, that trauma, that epidemic got us to where we are today. We wouldn't have PrEP. We wouldn't have civil partnerships. We wouldn't have queer marriage. We wouldn't have openness and pride unless we had that shit show, that horror show from 1981 to 2000. And that's why it's important to remember that, because those bodies that we celebrate and we honor and remember are the reason why we are here today. And that's why it's important to remember it.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. That's very eloquent. I'm going to ask some questions from the floor. Some people have sent through questions. Of course, I have loads of questions, but the floor has some, which is brilliant. So Kevin, thank you for your question, Kevin. So Kevin wants to know, Eric, who was the target or anticipated audiences, and who do you really wish would see this film? It's a really good question.
Yeah, it is. I think there's also a connection to this notion of history in this as well, which is that I think one of the sort of catch-22s of looking forward and not looking back is this promise of fitting in and belonging to a bigger group as opposed to belonging to the smaller group. And again, I think it's a question of risk. It's always risky to be a part of a small group, and it's much less risky to be a part of a big group. And so if you know, I mean, I'm married. I love my husband. I grew up in a time when the idea of marriage, gay marriage, was absurd. Like, it was not even remotely in my, you know, long distance view. I didn't even imagine that anyone would think it was worth fighting for, because it was hard enough even to have a gay relationship, you know. So I think some of those same questions of assimilation and belonging are part of Jewish life every day. They are part of Black life every day. You know, I mean, in Black Lives Matter, when they say, well, don't all lives matter, it is a question of like, do you belong to your small group, or do you want to like trade in that place for some chance that you might be accepted in a bigger group? And so I think the question of audience is somewhat related, which is that I don't think I thought about the poster or the trailer when I was making the movie. I had a story to tell, and I wanted to tell my story as authentically as I could, and I worked really, really hard on it. I spent years doing it. I was very, very determined and also incredibly, humbly blessed and lucky to raise the money to make a movie like this, and I made it. We made it. All of us made it. Everyone who worked on this really sweated and put themselves in it to get it done. And that's really as far as I thought. And I say that completely honestly, having been someone who worked as a studio executive and as a producer and someone who knows the mechanics of this business very, very well. I kept saying to myself, turn off that part of your brain that is thinking about a poster. Don't think about the audience. Don't think about the market. Tell the story. At the same time, and I think you and I, Campbell, talked about this a little bit before, is that I do think that I am a gay man. I am Jewish. I did grow up in New York. I am an AIDS survivor. I think all of these things are me. They're parts of me, and so I imagine that I have a very gay way of telling a story. I imagine I look at bodies the way a gay man looks at bodies. I look at, look, I looked at Sam the way a gay man looks at a young, good-looking man on stage. I was like, wow, all those things are
yes,
true,
Sam.
But I also know that I read poetry. All these things they're part of how I tell a story. I don't know. I go back and I think Henry James. I read Henry James a lot, and he was a queer white man who wrote these incredible books. And when you look at Henry James' words next to Hemingway's words, if you look at a sentence or a paragraph, if you're a gay man, that this is a queer writer. You can't not know it. You do. You just know it. And yet, nobody out there at the time was thinking, oh, only queer people should be reading Henry James. Everybody read Henry James. He wrote as a man. He wrote his characters a lot of his characters were women. And that's the way the world worked then. When we weren't so obsessed with labeling the groups and dividing and challenging them to assimilate or not assimilate. Do you want to be pride separate? Do you want to be pride but belong to the bigger group? And I think, look, I wish everybody would watch this movie. I don't think, my mom watched it. She's a 80-year-old straight woman. She loved the movie. She loved the sex.
But do you think
other people would too? I just don't know. I don't know what it will take. I think assimilation doesn't work in reverse, I guess is my point, is that I think in a way, yeah, sure, all right, we'll let gay people get married, but we're not, straight people really not so good about watching movies with gay people or not so good about watching movies about Jews. Someone says, oh, this is one of the best Jewish movies of the year. What does that mean? The old men wore slippers in their apartment in Brighton Beach, and there was one scene of Kiddush after shul on Shabbat where the old women were eating powdered donuts, and there's something about to me the lipstick that old Jews used, old white Jewish women used. It was very oily, and I I just remember my grandmother and her friends with the powdered sugar on their lips, and I as a child I was like, this is the greatest thing ever, but in my memory, it's like it's like such a Jewish thing.
I noticed that as well. I noticed that shot. There's another question here I want to ask from Mac G. Hi, Mac G. How important was it to have Well, this says Jews in the cast.
Jewish Jews.
No, I said Jewish, but what they said was Jews. So it's good. So to accurately read their question. So this is something that's come up a lot. It's like, should Jewish people only play Jewish people? Gay people only play? And I don't know if you want to answer that, Sam, in a way.
Sure. Or
yeah.
I'll speak on it a little bit. And I think Eric and I share a similar philosophy of, first, what's very important is the character. The character must be spoken for. And the actor who is playing that character must, if their heart has something to bring to that character, that's what's important. The harm that has been done by not representing people is undeniable, and we can't wash over that, right? So it is, there's not a catch-all answer, but we have to be aware of the importance of representation and the physical, tangible harm in real life that it does to people who are then erased from their own stories. On the matter of being Jewish, I think it's no coincidence that I'm a New York Jew, Brooklyn Jew. Ron is a New York Jew, a Brooklyn Jew.
Yeah.
And like, there's just something unspeakable, subconscious within us that we just have an understanding of, how we tell a story, how we hang out, how we eat food, how we be with each other. So I felt that was important for the movie, but the characters are so clear and Eric's story is so clear that I have no doubt that if an actor who was bringing their heart to the role and happened to not be Jewish, maybe they could still play the role. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking that while I was watching, because there's a way in which particular Jewish people in New York move. It's very different to LA Jews, how LA Jewish people move. Trust. So anyway, Eric.
I think I agree. And I also think that in some way, the answer is a little harder, which is that I think if you were in the audience and you're questioning, oh, this person isn't a Jew, or this person isn't queer, or this person isn't Black, or this person isn't cisgender or transgender, or if you question that in the audience, that's on me. That's on me. That's my failure as a director. That isn't on anyone in the cast. It's on me. And it's a whole chain of choices. I mean, it's partly in who you pick and cast to play the part, but it's also in how you communicate what the essence of that character is and where that essence lives and what makes it vibrate and what, turns it on and off. And I think it was important to have Jews in the cast because the community of Jews was important to how this movie works. I think it was important to have queer people in the movie because there were queer people building a community in this. It was important to have Black people in the cast and in the crew and men and women, and that was important to me because it was important. But I think in terms of your experience in the audience for Mac G, that I think is that's between Mac G in a way and me. I hope we succeeded. I would feel terrible if you were like, oh yeah, no, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the sex, or I didn't buy his Yiddish accent, or I didn't buy, like what you're saying, he moved like an LA Jew or something. If that's the way someone feels in the audience, that's on me. That's my failure. And so I think that's it's a slightly different maybe way. of
It's
looking.
great. It's great to have all the different perspectives. And Mac G, you can write in and say how was it for you, Mac G? Were you feeling it? There's a question from David. What was the point of so many references to the concentration camps and past sufferings? So that's a question for you, I guess, Eric, because you wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, I grew up in a community where the elders, my grandparents' generation, you know, they told stories in Yiddish and they whispered a lot because they had a very challenging relationship with the trauma that they had survived and that other people had not. And I think I picked up so many different vibrations of how to survive, how one survives if your family has been, you know, shot and buried in a ditch, how one survives if, you know, like your mother was, you know, like taken off the train, or, I mean, all those stories are so real to me because I feel them in my genes. I mean, I do, you know, like, and I feel them, you know, like you feel it when you go to a synagogue. You feel it when you walk in the streets of Berlin. You know, like when we were in Berlin, we went to the Holocaust Museum, and I think you know those stories are real. I also know that the stories of I mean, I in my own life, my first group of gay friends, my first, like, graduate from college and have a group of gay friends that you go to the bar with and that you hang out with. I graduated college in 1985. By 1990, they were all dead. They were all dead. Not a few. They were all dead except for me. And so I understood what, in a way, like what my, you know, like what my grandmother must have felt when, you know, like her family's, you know, back in Moldova, you know, when they wrote a letter and then the letters never got there, you know, I mean, that's what happened. And so the stories, again, I think it's sort of what Marc is saying. On the one hand, it would be great not to look back. And I wish that I didn't live with the traumas that I did. And I wish that I was like, yeah, like forward today, live for now, whatever. But I also feel a great debt and burden and weight of all those people that I wish were still here with us, you know, like I wish our world was shaped and populated with those people all the time. I mean, I'm always thinking that way. So you know, this is my version of the story. You know, someone else might tell it without those references.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And like, I'm just really touched by what you said, Eric. Really touched, and the weight of it all, to be honest. Thank you. Ralph has got a question. I love the film. I really felt as if I was back in 1980s New York. How difficult or easy was it to recreate the time?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard when you don't have a lot of money to, you know, ferry in, you know, car after car after car from 1985 and to green screen out, you know, like storefronts that have signage in them that you don't like. But at the same time, you know, Brighton Beach is a funny little time capsule of a place, and it still has a lot of the feel of an immigrant, first generation immigrant community. People on the streets speak Russian. The women are wearing fur coats that they brought with them from Russia. The signage is in Cyrillic. A lot of the housing that was built, in the 1920s still stands as beachfront property. It's a very distinct kind of world. It has a very low horizon. That beach, like the boardwalk and the beach is very low, so it's a lot of sky. And I think it has something about that sort of helps, but really probably all the credit is due to production designer Lucia Satius and Annie Simon, who did the costumes. And really they were costumes, a lot of them that she had been storing in her stores these days. I mean, it was like one jacket, one Mighty Mac jacket, one blue jacket with that sort of iridescent blue collar for Sam, and that, like that in some ways defined so much of the movie.
Yes. Thank you. I've just got one last, because we have to wrap up. I've got one last question, which I'm going to ask all of you. It's the same question, and it's about James Baldwin, because James Baldwin features a lot in this movie. And because I want you to have the last word, Eric, I'm going to go with you last. Yeah.
Sure.
So, Mark, what did you think about the James Baldwin references in relation to, you can say, if you relate to James Baldwin, had you read Giovanni's Room? What was the impact when you read it, if you had, or any of James Baldwin's writings, videos, whatever? Because I thought it was very impactful, and the kind of intersectional way, Eric, you melded like all the cultures together in one. The Jewish Russian immigrant with the James Baldwin, with the Torah, the text, beautiful. Mark, your relationship to...
Well, my relationship, first of all, if Jimmy shows up, Uncle Jimmy, as I call him, wherever he shows up...
Well, is your uncle now?
Well, he's an uncle because he's an ancestor.
He's an ancestor.
He's an ancestor, so we have to pay him the due respect, respect that he is due. So, and Giovanni's Room was the first book that I stole as well. So I stole that from a local bookshop because it had a black man on the cover and it was painted in pink, and I was 13. So Jimmy has always been a central part of my life. And so whenever he turns up in anything, and I think what's really powerful about him in this and his narrative is the fact that Jimmy crossed those different barriers, right? Around race, around gender, around sexuality. But I think what is most important, probably in this context, as a black queer man, he was a pastor. He was a preacher. Yeah. And so the notion of religion and speaking and passing down the word and teaching us what we can be in that tone, I think is incredibly important. So I think that Jimmy showing up in any sphere is always welcome for me, because we tend to, he sits in this really funny place, and we don't all claim him as queers, right? And we should do. So when I see white filmmakers, black filmmakers, whatever they are, claiming Jimmy, I'm like, yeah, you're right, because he spoke for all of us. He really did.
He did.
So yeah, so thank you, Eric, for making sure that Uncle's in there.
Uncle Jimmy.
Uncle Jimmy.
So Sam.
So Campbell.
Uncle Jimmy, how is it for you?
Thank God for James Baldwin. I had read, when I got the script, I started reading Giovanni's Room, and then since then I've read Another Country, The Fire Next Time. I still haven't read Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is the one David reads in the movie.
That's right, yeah.
But his writing, I think, is what David aims to be, which is, James Baldwin has such a way of like voicing these deep, dark, hidden urges and bringing them to your mouth and bringing them into action. And he's specific, and he's sexy, and he's outspoken, and he's present, and he's himself. And David struggles so hard to be himself, and James Baldwin is nothing but himself. So it's just so inspiring, and I'm so thankful to have gotten to read more of his work, and I'm sure I'll come back to it. Always back to the book, right?
Always back to the book.
Always back to
Always
the
back to the
book.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That was beautifully said. Thanks, Sam. And Eric, I know we've spoken about the text, how books are so important to you, and the Jewish connection to that as well. The text.
Yeah, I appreciate what Marc said about stealing the book, because I think I did as well. I'll get to the story in a beat, but I do think that there is this definition of Jews as the people of the book, and I think it is about the text and about the Torah scrolls and about how you keep going back over the books over and over in the same sequence, because every time you look at them and you read them, the words are the same, but you are different. You've changed, and so I think one of the things that I find so incredible about James Baldwin, Uncle Jimmy, is that it is the going back. Like when you go back and look at it again, you find things and you see things and you get the slant of it in such an accurate way to the way you are at that moment in your life, that I think that's how sharp it is. And I mean, I don't think anyone has ever had that way with words. And I would connect it in some way with Henry James, as I was saying before. There is in the language himself. It is him. It is queer. It is black. It is alien. It is other. It is yearning and sexy and passionate and spiritual and oppressed and all these things. So I mean, I love that about the text. I just for me, I know, like, I was very lucky. My grandparents were very and I think we were talking about this earlier, Campbell, that my grandparents really were on the forefront of a lot of the civil rights movements, and they marched and they registered voters in the South, and they were very connected. So Baldwin was a big book in our family. It was like if there had been a fire in the house, they would have saved a Baldwin book. I went to boarding school when I think I was 14 or 15, and it was a school that had a really amazing library. And I remember going through the stacks back when there really were books on stacks, and you had to like look up the Dewey Decimal number on a card and like walk your way through the library to find it, pretty much the way that scene unfolds in the movie of like searching for this book. And I really was just looking for James Baldwin. I was looking for something that I knew that would help me try to make sense of what was going on in my head. And I just touched Giovanni's Room. Like, it was there, and I took it off the shelf. And I think I probably read it like sitting right there. I mean, I don't think I could have spent the night in the library reading it. And I remember finishing it, and you get to the back of the book, and back in those days, library books had cards in them. And you had to write your name on the card when you took the book out of the library. And I remember seeing other people's names. And this, again, is like a list, right? Like, I remember seeing this list of names, and I was like, oh my God, I am not alone like this. This is not just me. I belong to this list. Like, I put my name on that list, like, and I put my name on it, and I took the book out, and I kept the book with me probably for most of the rest of that year, like in my knapsack, walking around with it, thinking that I wonder if I pulled this book out, if like it would be a coded sign and someone would be like, oh yeah, huh, there's another one like me. And I mean, that I wish I could get that card back, like with everyone's names on it. I would love to know what happened to all of us, who wrote their names on that card.
There's a film in there somewhere.
It really is.
The list of names, Thank you for that beautiful story, Eric. I could listen to you forever. Thanks, Sam, for your wonderful openness and vulnerability and strength and beautiful performance in Minyan. Really, thank you so much. Thanks, Marc, for being here, for all your activist work, for your eloquence. It's been a pleasure to share space with all of you. Thank you all for your questions, which were fantastic. I have some announcements to make, which I have been fed, so I have to read them so as I don't get them wrong. The first thing is to thank the BFI Audience Fund for supporting this event. And Peccadillo Pictures has emailed you a questionnaire on their behalf. Please do take a moment to fill it in, as they would like to know your opinions of the film and the Q&A. So please do that. This is part of the funding. I know it's really tedious, but it helps. Also, to let you know that Minyan opens in cinemas on Friday at home in Manchester alongside JW3 and Curzon Bloomsbury in London. And it's also going to be available to stream on Apple TV, Amazon Video, Google Play, BFI Player, Curzon Home Cinema, and Peccadillo Pod. So please go out, watch, share it on the socials. We have those lists. Use your lists of networks to share about the film and get people to watch it. And in our when we come the next time, will be another film from New York called Cicada by Matthew Pfeiffer and Kieran Mulcair. And here is the trailer. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
So tell us about you. It's a safe space.
Been in New York for 3 years now. I guess my relationship with sex hasn't always been healthy.
You're back on the dick.
You got a girlfriend? Age?
26
and a half.
Are you seeing someone?
You still won't kiss me in public. Why not? No one's watching. But he's great. Sam!
What are you doing here?
Listen, I don't know why I can't bring my boyfriend flowers.
This is moving too fast. Try not to care about what the world thinks about us, because this is real for me. What were you like?
What was I like when?
Growing up.
You can talk to me. I'll listen.
Seeing doctors, you mean?
We did all the tests, nothing came up. You're good.
You go to church for Sam?
Am I the first black guy you ever dated?
What was that supposed to mean?
I hope everything works out.
Making my own decisions.